Wes Walker says, free speech versus hate speech. Thoughts? I have some. I don't think there's such a thing as hate speech. I think once you have the idea of hate speech, then that means that your speech is beholden to somebody else's opinion. And the one thing we've learned from this catastrophe of entitlement and grievance for political effect has been that there's not a town in America that apparently doesn't have enough of a crackpot, or not just even a crackpot, just a nasty sort of crabby kind of person who won't go and try and have the city pull down the nativity display. Right? So if you've had a Christmas nativity display for 100 years in a town, and one guy comes along and complains about it and talks about the separation of church and state, which is in the Constitution, even though it's not, or in the Declaration either, for that matter, even though it was a phrase that just Thomas Jefferson just happened to toss off in a private letter to somebody someplace. Nevertheless, we know that that there's always somebody who can be offended at anything. And so if you have any definition of hate speech, then your freedom of speech is over. There is no free speech. Because if you have such a thing as hate speech, that means that that's a kind of speech that people find to be offensive or intolerant or whatever the case may be. And then once you come to that place, once you reach that vaulted pinnacle of reason, then it's all over. Because if one person or group gets to have hate speech, then certainly other people get to have hate speech. And then when you have hate speech, then you can shut people up. I find that offensive. Sorry. Now, I find it offensive and it's against the law. Now I'm the one who's really sorry, right? So really, there's no such thing as hate speech. And there's either free speech or there's controlled speech, and hate speech is a form of controlling speech, so you can have one or the other. I'll take the free speech, because it's not just speech, by the way. When we talk about free speech, me anyway, when I think about free speech, I think about people standing in a town square or publishing an article in the press. But that's not really where the danger is, in my opinion. The danger is it modifies the way you think. It really does. It really modifies the way you think. If certain things are perceived to be so hateful or so untouchable, so socially untouchable, you don't even think about them. Or if you do, you don't dare express it, and you live this kind of double life where you've got this inner system of beliefs and you just kind of bow your head and shake, and look at your shoes while other people are talking out in the real world. And we see this in California, in Hollywood, a great deal. I'm hanging out with a lot of Hollywood entertainment people, a lot of actors who basically have to sit in makeup rooms and look at their feet while every single liberal in the room bashes, used to be the president, now they praise the president, and they bash conservatives, and they bash the military, and they bash the country, and they bash oil, and they bash this, and they bash that, and you have to sit there and shake your head, because if you don't, you won't ever work again. Because if they find out you're conservative in this town, they don't need a blacklist. They just won't hire you, and they won't tell you why. So I think hate speech is the end of everything. It's the end of the American experiment. It's the end of everything. Because look, folks, I've said this before. The whole idea of America is that we should be allowed to disagree. I mean, the whole point of America is that it's this kind of fusion reactor of opposing viewpoints are doing this. They're just spreading out. They're just pushing out. And theoretically, the counterforce that keeps the reactor of the sun of energy, creative energy that is America, the compressing force, the binding force should be the gravity of our love of country. It should be that, that guy's an idiot, but at least he's an American. Okay, it's a free country. You say what you want. So what happens is, if you start to eliminate the binding force of common love of country, and then you also start to say, oh, and by the way, what you say is offensive to me, and therefore it's illegal, then basically what you're trying to do is you're just trying to shut down the opposition. It's like, that's all that political correctness is just shutting down the opposition. And political correctness has worked. I don't think it's working anymore, but it has worked for many years because of people's guilt. And most of the time, virtually all the time, it's people's guilt about things that they never did. I didn't hold any slaves. I have no sense of guilt about slavery whatsoever. I have a little bit of shame to the degree that it was a dark spot on my nation's history. I don't feel any personal guilt about it at all. But prior to the race card being played all the time, and especially since this guy's been president, it's played so maliciously, it's played so frequently, it's played over such small things, it's played so often and so shamelessly that it has no effect on me anymore. I just don't care. I don't care what they say about me. Maybe you're a racist because you criticize the president. Okay, I guess that's what I am then. If the new definition of racism is ignoring somebody's skin color as individuals but criticizing a black person, then I guess I'm a racist. If that's the definition of racism today, saying something that a black person finds offensive automatically makes you a racist, then I'm a racist. But that's not what the word means, and I'll have that fight with you before I walk away. So I don't believe in it. And I think I really don't know where you draw the line. Even if you were to agree with the entire idea of hate speech, which I throw out on its face, what's hate speech and what's not? Now you get into another issue, which is really even more important, because it's all about political power and shutting up the opposition. If you agree that there is such a kind of speech that is so hateful that it has to be against the law, then who decides? Who decides? Who has the arbitrary ability to decide whether or not you've broken the law? If you say to somebody, hey, don't be a fag, a lot of people would consider that hate speech. Is that the same? Would that get you fired? Would that get you kicked off of MSNBC or whatever? Who decides? So that's another reason why this thing is a horrible idea. And in terms of fighting not I don't want to say fighting hate speech, because I don't think there's such a thing as hate speech. Fighting the idea of hate speech, I think the only way to do it is just to do it, is to fight back. We never fight back. We're starting to fight back, I think. My friend Jeremy is part of Truth Revolt, and Truth Revolt has basically gotten Alec Baldwin and now Martin Bashir kicked off the air because they've made consequences in terms of their sponsors. And people say, well, that's shocking. You should be able to say what you want to in this country on the air. I tend to agree. As a guy who's on the air, I tend to agree. Although what Bashir said on the air is fireable. I'd fire that guy if he worked for me. If he said it about Roseanne Barr, I'd fire him. I don't want to be represented by somebody like that. Bashir's comments were on the air, on the show, on the network, and they were horrible and shameful. What Baldwin says to a paparazzi in the heat of the moment, I don't know. I probably wouldn't have fired him for that. I think we should be allowed to say what we say, but. Glenn Beck is not on Fox News anymore because the left formed a coordinated boycott against him. When Rush Limbaugh, somebody called, was it Ed Schultz called Laura Ingraham a slut, some kind of a slut? I think it was somebody called her a slut. And no consequences. Rush Limbaugh calls Sandra Fluck a slut, and he loses $50 million in advertising revenue. So Truth Revolt's position is, hey, we played by the Marquis of Queensberry's rules for 30 years now, 40 years now. We're getting tired of getting kicked in the groin by these people. So now we're going to kick back. You ever want to change the rules back to a forum of decency and civility? We'd be happy to put our weapons aside. But they are also going after these people now, and they're 2 for 2. And no one did that after my friend Andrew Breitbart used to do that. I think you ought to be able to say pretty much what you want to in this country. But if you drop the F-bomb on the air, especially if you talk about somebody like that, you're done. That just goes without saying. So I think that this whole thing is a really bad idea, and I don't think it's just a bad idea in the political arena. I think it really, really, really hurts millennials. I had a class of millennials came and they wanted me to talk to the class. It was like a journalism class or something. And I sat with them for a while. And they called me all kinds of things, really. And I started arguing back. And I said, that's offensive to me. It's personally offensive to me that you say this. You don't know anything about me. You don't know anything about who I hang with. You don't know anything about me or what I say. And this deeply, deeply offends me. And this 20-year-old girl just got up and started crying, walked out of the room. Everybody said, you were being mean to her. I said, no, I wasn't being mean to her. She accused me of being a murderer, complicit in murder. And I told her why I wasn't and why it was offensive to me. She walked up and went out of the room and cried. maybe if she didn't want to have somebody be mean to her, she wouldn't accuse them of being a murderer if they don't have any particular evidence that I committed some murder. And so what you find is this whole idea of protected speech and everybody having to make nice means that, once you get out in the real world, these people just can't cope. It's not their fault. They've never had to cope, and there's no conflict resolution for them. They don't know how to handle it. They don't seem to have a very good handle on how to handle any kind of unpleasant kind of thing. Like I was reading something about this, as saying, even things like breaking up with somebody you've been dating for 4 or 5 weeks is causing some of these people to go suicidal almost because they can't do the conflict resolution because frankly, folks, because they haven't been toughened up. It's really just that simple. You get toughened up. I came to Key Biscayne Elementary School when I was in 10th grade. Came from a British colony. So I had a British accent, and I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how to play football. I barely know how to play baseball. I knew how to play baseball because I learned them in the Navy base back in Bermuda. But I didn't have a lot of friends at first, but I had friends real quick. I made friends real quickly because, an interesting guy, I guess. And so, but I got called a lot of names. I got called names all the time. Been called names, most of my life. And you learn... I think you learn two things. First of all, you learn on some level not to take it personally because these people don't know anything about you. But I think probably what's helped me the most in terms of facing some of this unfair criticism, and it's all unfair because, look, I've never had anybody argue with me on the arguments. They always argue with me about, things about me, who I am, and they don't know anything about me. So I think the second thing that's really important to understand in terms of toughening up people emotionally for things like hate crimes. Hate crime. I don't believe in hate crimes either, by the way. I don't believe in hate speech. I don't believe in hate crimes. I believe everybody should say whatever they want to, and if you get offended at it, that's just too bad. I also believe that if you mug somebody and they're gay, you shouldn't have to pay a higher price if you mug somebody and they're not gay. And I think murder is murder. You murdered a kid. Electric chair time for you. He was a gay kid, so we got to make it worse. I don't see it that way. Murder is murder. Assault is assault. I don't think you get extra time or less time because you beat up a protected class or an unprotected class. This whole thing's about power. It's about power. It's not about justice. It's about power. It's about political power. It's about shutting up your opposition. So, anyway, yeah, I think that's really it. I just don't buy into this whole thing. But as I was saying, toughening you up. I think the thing that really helps me the most when all the stuff gets hurled at you personally, I think what helps me the most is, well, somebody said that, you're over the target when you're taking flack. So there's that. But I think the thing that's really most important for me to understand was when I first started doing this with a blog, I was dating this woman who I was really close to for a long time, for 5-6 years. And she said, do you have to be so strong in your opinions? Because she would read the comments sections, and every now and then somebody'd go off a little bit. And she was worried about me. She's a little worried about my safety. And I said, I'm not worried about my safety. Anybody can be an internet tough guy. And besides, there are people far bigger reach than me. So if you got a lunatic who's out there to shoot somebody, they're probably going to go after Rush or Beck or any of these other guys. But what I said to her was, I said, I could write an essay about how awesome apple pie is, and within 2 or 3 minutes, the cherry pie people would start calling me a Nazi. And that's when I began to realize that that's really what this comes down to, right? You write something about how awesome cherry pie is, and then the apple pie people will call you a Nazi. So, on some level, the only way not to get criticism is to not say anything. And I've never been that way. Long before I was doing it for a living, I always felt like, you're not going to tell me what to think or what to say. But I will close this little beat on hate speech by saying this. I completely believe that these people on the left, these progressives, I believe they have utterly overdrawn this card. I think they've had the race card has been a credit card with a huge limit on it. And I just think we're just saying, no, we're just done with it. No, we're not paying anymore. We're not putting any more on the card. It's over. It's done. I'd love to deal with this Torre guy or whatever his name is on MSNBC. I'd love to hear him bring up slavery to my face. I would just love it. I'd love it. I'd leap into this guy. I really would. Seriously, man? 170 years ago, that's what you got? You're coming at me with something happened 170 years ago? Really? Where were your ancestors 170 years ago? And the chance of them having worked on a plantation is quite small, because most blacks came to this country after slavery. But if he could prove to me, well, my parents were working on a cotton plantation in the South, they're a white boy, my response would be, well, would you like to trade? Because my parents at that time, my great-great-grandparents back in 1850s and 60s and 1870s were coal miners in Lancashire, and they weren't in a big coal mine either. They were in backyard coal mines. My ancestors lived under the ground in a room about 4 foot high that went back 400, 500 feet into the bowels of the earth. They died of black lung disease when they were 25 years old. Seriously, everybody's working for somebody, right? And I mean it. You can't compare those two existences. And I don't go around talking about all the injustices that were done to my family. I don't talk about any of that stuff. They were as much a slave of that system as they couldn't just get up and leave. They didn't have any money. They were coal miners and mill workers. And the difference between you and me is that I look at the work that my forefathers did to put me into this position as a boost, as something to be proud of, as something that I owe them. I owe them this work and this excellence to the degree that I can deliver it, right? I owe it to them. I did the genealogy, and it went, I don't know how many generations back we went, 11 maybe, something like that. It's like coal miner, family of 10, died at 35. Mill worker. I have 3 direct ancestors, a father, his son, and his grandson, 3 of them, for 3 generations of Whittles back there in the Whitehill region of Lancashire, mostly in a town called Wigan. Wigan, not Wigham. Wigham would be really cool, especially if it was Ralphie Wigham. Me flunk coal mining? That's impossible. For 3 generations, my ancestors were cotton carders. Do you know what a cotton carter is? Here's what a cotton carter does. A cotton carter has a piece of wood about this big. Piece of wood about that big. And it's got a handle on the back, and the other one has a handle on the back, and it's got wires, hooked wires, kind of like the things that you use on a cat. And a cotton carter gets a wad of cotton about this big. Somebody hands it to him, and he sits there and he does this, and he just does this, and he what he's doing is he's aligning the strands of the cotton from being all balled up from when it comes off of the bowl, and he aligns the strands, and he brushes out the dirt and brushes out some of the debris, and he does this for about, I don't know, a couple minutes, something like that. And when he's finished doing this, he rolls it up into something about the size of a cigar, and he hands it off to the people that then get it ready to spin on the looms. So they spin it into cotton thread, and then they start to weave it. So I have an ancestor who was a cotton carder, and his son was a cotton carder, and his son was a cotton carder. And they did this in a freezing cold factory from about 7 o'clock in the morning until about 7 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. That's what they did. That's all they did. So I'm not really interested in hearing what happened to your people 7 generations ago, 8 generations ago. I'm not interested in it. P.G. O'Rourke would talk about people complaining about their backgrounds, and he'd say your ancestors were walking in marble palaces while the O'Rourkes were living in trees. A bunch of bog walking Irishmen. This idea that that this is a unique sort of a privation that the entire world was just sitting on verandas sipping mint juleps while only the black people are out there. It's just madness. It's nonsense. It's insanity. And yes, I understand the difference of slavery, and I also understand that back in the time of slavery, there were such things as indentured servitude, which is a form of slavery. There are all kinds of different spectrums of slavery. Now you're either free or you're not. But back then, it was very different. These people couldn't leave. They couldn't just go someplace. They couldn't just take a walk. So that's what they were. And if you look at the background of my history, it's astonishing. It really is. It's absolutely astonishing. Let's see if I can do this in reverse. So yes. So here's the that's the y-axis, and down here is the where's my hand? There we go. The camera's so high. Is the x-axis, right? So this is awesomeness, and this is time. So we started out down here, as far back as we could go, with the Whitehills from Lancashire. And we were coal miners in the coal mines, humped over in a mine that might be 4 feet tall. And then the factories came to town. And that was a big step up because you're not under the ground in sub-freezing temperatures having mines collapse on you and breathing coal dust. So we actually took quite a step up. And so then the Whittles were working in textile mills in Lancashire, in England, for 7 generations. Then things really began to improve because we were plumbers for a generation or two. I think one of them might have been like a hatter or a milliner or something like that. And then, starting with my grandfather, he comes to America in 1915. So we've got coal miners, coal miners, coal miners, coal miners, mill workers, mill workers, mill workers, mill. Then Ernest Whittle comes to America. And Ernest Whittle instantly becomes a telephone lineman, which at the time was tech, man. He was cutting-edge, bleeding-edge tech guy. He was hanging telephone lines, and he met a telephone operator who was the operator of Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania for 50 years. My grandmother would have that switchboard. May I help you? And connect those spaghetti cables. So she operated the switchboard, and he was a telephone lineman. This is my grandparents. And so we went from coal miner, coal miner, coal miner, mill worker, mill, plumber, come to the new world, telephone lineman, hotel manager, internet celebrity. I know it's a terrible, tragic fall from the mill worker days. And if you don't think I'm grateful about that, you're out of your mind. That telephone lineman whose job was so many orders of magnitude above his dad's or the other Whittles before him, Ernest, my grandfather, who I never met, died before I was born. But I've seen Joseph Whittle's notebooks. My grandmother and my Aunt Marty, his eldest daughter, passed them down to me, gave me a folder of them. And you know what my grandfather wanted to be? He wanted to be a writer. He wanted to be a writer. And he was a good writer. But he couldn't be a writer. Do you know why? Because he had 10 kids to feed. So he hung telephone lines in the winter in Pennsylvania. That's what he did. And he didn't get to be a writer. And he didn't cry about not being a writer. And he was a good writer on his own time. He hung telephone lines so that I could be a writer. Any questions, Torre? Because I'll guarantee you one thing, pal. If your ancestors, Torre, actually were on a plantation, let's just say they were, what they would have wished for you is they wished that they could have put you on their shoulders and given you a boost up. What your generations of ancestors toiling on a plantation under the lash of slavery wished for was for their children to be free, and you're not free. You're chained to slavery. And you'll never give it up because you like it, because it's good for you, because it's good for you. You work it to your advantage. It's a paycheck for you, this slavery thing, Torre. It's a paycheck. And what you're doing is you're continuing to slave more of your people with this belief of something that happened 170 years ago. You're continuing to enslave them for your own personal enrichment. So let's just call it what it is, dude. That's what it is. You want to know what it is? That's what it is. You are selling this model of slavery and racism, which doesn't exist, to keep the rest of black people bitter and angry so that they'll fail. And you don't care because you're getting your paycheck. Let's just call it what it is. That's what it is. Any questions? You miserable lowlife, son of a bitch. You have the audacity to stand up there and criticize us for talking about individuality and freedom and making your own way in the world? Seriously? You're selling this ridiculous idea of bitterness and dependency, to what you would call your own people. I don't think black people belong to you. I don't see black people that way. I don't believe in the idea of black people. You're selling individuals on this idea that they're being held down artificially when they're not. And of all the people that you're insulting in this, forget about me. I don't have a right not to be insulted. But of all the people that you're insulting your ancestors, who, if they in fact were on a plantation, certainly expected better of this than this from you. Better than this from you. If they found out that your job 170 years after slavery or whatever the case may be, if they found out that their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson was out there convincing innocent people that they're still suffering from slavery after all real slaves went through and all the real hardships they actually went through, and you try to convince them that there's still this yoke around them, I think they'd take you out to the woodshed, and I think they'd whip you pretty badly, frankly. That's what I think your grandparents would do if they found out what you were trying to pull here, because it's a con game, dude. It's a con game. You're selling snake oil. You're selling snake oil to the masses. Get over it. Let's just call it what it is. Look, man. Look, there are people that run Ponzi schemes. There are people that con old people out of their Social Security checks. It's a living, I guess. Fine. Just own it. Just own it.